We've talked about the strange ritualistic goings-on at Bohemian Grove, mass government surveillance, and secret CIA mind control experiments. But guess what? We're back with even more strange conspiracy theories. Notions that once seemed too ridiculous to be possible. But truth is often stranger than fiction, and these theories are not just theories anymore. At some point, they were revealed to be at least partially fact. From companies hiding deadly secrets to animal spies to the UFO sighting at Roswell. These are the insane conspiracy theories that turned out to be true, Part 3. The opioid crisis has ruined countless lives and caused the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Americans. Even those who didn't lose their lives in a literal sense have lost years to addiction, all because of the overprescription of highly addictive painkillers that were not regulated in time to curb the disaster. But surely the pharmaceutical companies responsible for the manufacturing, marketing, and the sale of these drugs wouldn't have let them spread so far if they had only known just how addictive they would be. No one could possibly be that morally bankrupt, right? Well, as it turns out, some people could, in fact, be that morally bankrupt. Everyone who theorized that the pharmaceutical companies knew what they were getting patients into was right. The opioid crisis was built on a foundation of lies and conspiracy. When OxyContin was first launched in 1996, physicians who purchased the drug were told that it was weaker than morphine and that its slow-release properties made it non-addictive, contrary to other painkillers of similar strengths. That would have been great news if any of it had been true. OxyContin was in fact twice as strong as morphine and was absolutely addictive. And Purdue Pharma, along with the Sackler family who founded the company, knew this entire time. According to previously sealed documents obtained by ProPublica in 2019, the head of sales and marketing at Purdue, Michael Friedman, emailed Dr. Richard Sackler in 1997 about the difference between OxyContin's perceived strength and its actual strength. Friedman wrote it would be extremely dangerous at this early stage in the life of the product to make physicians think the drug is stronger or equal to morphine. We are well aware of the view held by many physicians that oxycodone is weaker than morphine. I do not plan to do anything about that. Oxycodone was the active ingredient in OxyContin. Sackler responded, "I agree with you." A few days after that email conversation, Sackler exchanged emails with Michael Cullen, another employee of the Purdue Pharma Company. Cullen wrote, "Since oxycodone is perceived as being a weaker opioid than morphine, it has resulted in OxyContin being used much earlier for non-cancer pain. Physicians are positioning this product where Percocet, hydrocodone, and Tylenol with codeine have been traditionally used. It is important that we be careful not to change the perception of physicians toward oxycodone when developing promotional pieces, symposia, review articles, studies, etc." In response, Sackler said, "I think that you have this issue well in hand." Purdue was sued many times over the years for its blatantly deceptive marketing of OxyContin, but it always settled those suits out of court in order to avoid attracting too much negative attention. But then, in November 2020, Purdue finally admitted responsibility on a public stage. Purdue pleaded guilty to conspiracy to defraud the United States, violating the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, and violating the federal anti-kickback statute. Attorney for the United States Rachel A. Honig said Purdue admitted that it marketed and sold its dangerous opioid products to healthcare providers, even though it had reason to believe those providers were diverting them to abusers. The company lied to the Drug Enforcement Administration about steps it had taken to prevent such diversion, fraudulently increasing the amount of its products it was permitted to sell. Purdue also paid kickbacks to providers to encourage them to prescribe even more of its products. We now go from one instance of corporate greed to another, albeit with a much smaller body count. But first, we have a question for you. Have you ever done a Google search on your own name? Were you surprised by just how many results there were? And how many had your real address, phone number, and even things like health records available for literally anyone to find? I couldn't believe how much of my personal data was available, and it really frightened me. And that's why I've been using Aura, the sponsor of today's video. Aura shows me which data brokers are selling my information and automatically submits opt-out requests. And removing that information not only has reduced the amount of spam calls and emails I get, it also protects me from hackers who could use it to access my accounts, everything from social media to online banks. But it's not just sketchy companies that you have to worry about. AT&T recently revealed that over 73 million existing and former customers had their information leaked onto the dark web. In response, they recommended everyone use stronger passwords, monitor account activity, and consider credit freezes or fraud alerts from credit bureaus. But I didn't have to, because Aura already does all this for me. And best of all, I didn't have to download a bunch of different apps just because a company couldn't keep my data secure. Even if my info is compromised, I don't have to worry because Aura is always on and always doing the hard work to keep me safe. I value my privacy, and I value yours. So go to aura.com/infographics or use the link in the description to start your 2-week free trial. Thanks to Aura. And now back to the video. A few years ago, the more eccentric corners of the internet were overrun with a conspiracy theory regarding the furniture company Wayfair. Many users insisted that Wayfair was secretly smuggling children and selling them via online listings. Don't worry, we're not about to tell you that that nonsense was true. It was, of course, widely debunked and did not happen. But that doesn't mean that corporate smudging is entirely the stuff of myth. In fact, craft store giant Hobby Lobby was exposed at the center of a massive smuggling scandal. But they weren't smuggling people, they were smuggling artifacts, including one of the oldest known works of literature in human history. This scrapped Indiana Jones B-plot turned reality began in 2009 when Hobby Lobby began collecting items to display in its new pet project, the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C. In December of 2010, Hobby Lobby spent $1.6 million on various artifacts from Iraq, including cuneiform tablets, clay boli, clay envelope seals, and stone cylinder seals. Some of those items came with forged provenance statements that the company didn't bother to verify, while others had nothing to suggest their previous ownership or history of sale, indicating that they had likely been stolen or purchased on the black market. An expert hired by the company to appraise the items warned that they appeared to have been acquired through less than savory means. But Hobby Lobby ignored the warnings and proceeded to ship the items in multiple packages from Israel to 3 different Hobby Lobby addresses. The shipping labels lied about the contents of the packages, describing them as ceramic tiles manufactured in Turkey, which were worth between $250 and $300. According to officials at U.S. Customs, buying items for less than their worth, lying about the provenance and value, and shipping to multiple addresses from another country are all red flags that indicate smuggling. 5 out of the 8 packages were seized by customs and never made it to Hobby Lobby. In 2017, the United States Department of Justice filed a complaint against Hobby Lobby, ordering them to forfeit the objects that had made it to the U.S. The reasoning for the complaint was twofold. First, the smuggling of the items was a customs violation, and second, it was a violation of Iraq's patrimony laws, making the smuggling operation also a violation of U.S. National Stolen Property Act. The artifacts smuggled by Hobby Lobby for their Bible museum were, according to archaeological experts, likely stolen from the National Museum of Iraq, as well as from archaeological sites. On July 5, 2017, Hobby Lobby agreed to a settlement. They would return the artifacts and pay a fine of $3 million. All in all, they were required to forfeit over 5,000 artifacts, which were returned to Iraq. The company claimed that this was all a big misunderstanding and that they would avoid making the same mistakes in the future. By mistakes, we mean committing various crimes. And as it turns out, they did make that supposed mistake again. In May 2020, the Department of Justice filed another complaint against the company. This time, they were ordered to forfeit a cuneiform tablet from Iraq. The tablet was none other than the Gilgamesh Dream Tablet, a Babylonian tablet from 1600 BCE that contained a portion of the Epic of Gilgamesh. Again, Hobby Lobby failed to confirm the item's provenance, which was later revealed to have been faked. Hobby Lobby was once again ordered to relinquish the artifact, and the authorities seized it. Now, we're no experts in the museum and antiquities business, but it seems like maybe Hobby Lobby should just stick to crafts going forward. There are many conspiracy theories out there that revolve around connections between those in political power and the forces of the occult. Whether that concerns links to secret organizations or supposed deals with the devil, it seems to be pretty popular to link politicians to the supernatural. That link was more than just a theory for one significant American political figure. Like many other Southern California women before her and after, former First Lady Nancy Reagan was very interested in astrology. In his 1965 book, Where's the Rest of Me?, former President Reagan described his Nancy's daily routine of reading their astrological charts. In an LA Times article, the spokesman for astrologer Carol Ryder mentioned that Reagan never revealed his exact birth time publicly out of concern that people might read his birth chart, using this information and then use it to control him. Of the two, Nancy was far more interested in the stars and the planets and their potential impact on all of our lives. Though she and Ronald both had long been interested in it, Nancy's fascination with astrology deepened following the trauma of the 1981 attempt on Ronald Reagan's life. Wanting to have someone around who could have predicted the assassination attempt, Nancy got back in touch with an old contact, a San Francisco astrologer named Joan Quigley. This marked the start of a close relationship that would span both of her husband's terms in the White House. In his memoir For the Record, former Reagan administration Chief of Staff Don Regan wrote that virtually every major move and decision the Reagans made during my time as White House Chief of Staff was cleared in advance with this woman in San Francisco who drew up horoscopes to make certain that the planets were in a favorable alignment for the enterprise. According to Regan, President Reagan kept a color-coded calendar based on Joan's advice, with each day corresponding to a color based on how auspicious it would be. Good days were highlighted in green, and red days highlighted in red. Nancy spoke with Joan almost every weekend, though they kept their involvement a secret from the American public. After Don Regan's memoir was published, complete with his vague complaints about the over-involvement of an astrologer in Reagan's schedule, Quigley's name was leaked to the press by a member of the administration. Nancy placed a frantic call to Joan's home, where Joan's sister Ruth picked up. Nancy insisted that this must never come out. Ruth asked if the Reagan administration would perhaps acknowledge Joan's years of dedicated service after their time in office was up. Nancy refused and said never. In 1990, Joan took the chance to tell her side of the story in her memoir, What Does Joan Say? In it, she made some bold claims about the extent of her involvement in the Reagan presidency. She described assisting with trade negotiations, helping to prepare for public addresses, and keeping the president safe. She even claimed to have read the horoscope of Gorbachev himself and took credit for affecting the relationship between the United States and the Soviet Union. Have you ever noticed your iPhone seems to slow down every time a new model is released? Or maybe you could swear that your laptop hasn't been running the same lately, no matter how many updates you install. Well, as it turns out, that may not be your imagination. You can thank that nasty little concept of planned obsolescence or the deliberate production of consumer goods intended to become obsolete quickly, thus forcing customers to keep buying new products rather than repairing the ones they already have. In 2017, Apple was hit with a class action lawsuit after admitting that, as many users had theorized for years, they deliberately slowed down older iPhones. This is not the only example of Apple incentivizing people to throw out their old phones and buy new ones, rather than keeping and maintaining the phones they already have. The Halt Planned Obsolescence Association, or HOP, filed a complaint against the tech company in 2023, prompting an investigation into the way that Apple handles its product repairs. HOP hoped that the investigation led by a Paris prosecutor would show that Apple was associating the serial numbers of spare parts to those of a smartphone, including via microchips, giving the manufacturer the possibility of restricting repairs by non-approved repairers or to remotely degrade a smartphone repaired with generic parts. Wired spoke with Elizabeth Chamberlain, sustainability director at iFixit, about the investigation and an aspect of Apple's alleged planned obsolescence known as parts pairing. This refers to the linking of serial numbers mentioned by HOP. Chamberlain elaborated on the practice, stating, "In the iPhone, the way it shows up most perniciously is that if you try to swap two screens from two working iPhones, in these cases the swapped screens either won't work or will generate error messages stating that the screen is not verified. This lack of spare parts leaves iPhone owners whose phone screens break with limited options. They either have to pay specially branded Apple technicians for an expensive repair or just throw in the towel and buy a new phone altogether." Of course, Apple and the other tech companies are not the only culprits when it comes to planned obsolescence. Children's toys are frequently made from low-durability plastics or soft metals, which will break quickly. The fast fashion industry uses a combination of cheap materials and rapidly changing trends to ensure that their clothes have little staying power in any sense of the word. If it rips after one wear or it's out of style in a month, you'll have to buy something else. In summary, many companies stand to benefit from making products that are not built to last. The shorter the product's lifespan, the more they can convince you to buy, and the more profit they stand to make. Corporate greed strikes again. Every time a new protest movement is born, naysayers wait in the wings to claim that the protesters are not earnest advocates for their cause. The notion of the paid protester is a pervasive one. The idea that anyone protesting the status quo is doing it not out of principles but because some shadowy figure is paying them. Often, this notion goes hand in hand with other conspiracy theories, frequently anti-Semitic in nature, such as claims that George Soros was funding anti-police brutality protests in 2020. But paid protesters do exist. They just don't look like most vocal proponents of the theory, such as former incendiary talk radio host Rush Limbaugh might imagine. The FBI has a history of sending its employees to infiltrate protests when undercover in civilian clothes. For example, It was recently uncovered that approximately 10 FBI informants were embedded in the anti-Dakota Access Pipeline protest camps near the Standing Rock Sioux Indian Reservation in 2016. In 2020, the FBI paid a convicted felon to act as an informant and an infiltrator in the protests against the killing of George Floyd by police. Not only did the informant embed himself in the protests, he also alleged to have encouraged other protesters to become increasingly violent in their activism while trying to entrap them. This practice is hardly recent when it comes to the FBI. In the 1960s, COINTELPRO saw the FBI place informants in several activist movements, including the Black Panthers, with the same goal of sowing dissent and increasing tensions within the ranks. The FBI is not the only one behind these various paid protesters. While Rahm Emanuel was serving as mayor of Chicago, reporters at various outlets, including the Chicago Tribune, broke the story that Chicago residents speaking out in support of his school closures had actually been paid to be there. They weren't paid by Emanuel himself, but rather Reverend Roosevelt Watkins, but they were still being paid to publicly support Emanuel's policy decisions. In 2009, The Guardian broke the story that British police were using hundreds of paid informants to infiltrate protest groups and feed information to the authorities. Some of the recordings provided to The Guardian as evidence were made during meetings between Strathside Police and Matilda Gifford, a member of the environmental activist group Plain Stupid. In these recordings, Gifford was offered money for information. An exact amount was not named, but her student loans were brought up as part of the bargain. During the recordings, the officers referred to the alleged network of hundreds of informants at various organizations. In 2006, the Wall Street Journal revealed that Kremlin-backed Russian immigrants funded protests in the United States, paying protesters to advocate for causes that benefited the Russian government. In 2012, in the wake of anti-Putin demonstrations in Russia, massive crowds of Putin admirers also turned up to celebrate his inauguration. Or did they? Reporters at Time determined that many of these supposed supporters were being paid to show up. They had been recruited through a website called masovki.ru. One man affiliated with the website, who asked that the Time refer to him as Sergei Vasilyevich, described his experience paying rally attendance through the site. On a good day, he said, about 40% of the demonstrators in attendance were paid. How much did one of these rallies cost once everyone was paid out? About $137,000. In 2011, a CNN article about pro-Mubarak protesters in Cairo, Egypt, revealed that these counter-protesters had been paid to be there by the government. These paid counter-protesters also attacked anti-Mubarak demonstrators. So there have been many documented cases of paid protesters, but the person footing the bill tends to, more often than not, be a representative of the status quo being protested. Sometimes they're on the same side as those raising concerns about paid protesters in the first place. For example, Putin has previously claimed that student demonstrators were being paid to protest him. When it comes to the paid protesters' panic, the call is coming from inside the House. During the 2016 election, theories began to circulate that deliberate misinformation and disinformation was being spread by Russian operatives attempting to influence U.S. politics. Oh, did you think we were finished talking about Russia? Come on, the Russian government and conspiracies go together like peanut butter and espionage. In 2018, the U.S. Senate released a report claiming that Russian disinformation campaigns swept through YouTube, Tumblr, Instagram, PayPal, Facebook, and Twitter in 2016 in an attempt to spread propaganda. The report, compiled by the University of Oxford's Computational Propaganda Project, linked these campaigns to the Internet Research Agency, a Russian company alleged by the U.S. intelligence community as a troll farm with ties to the Russian government. The campaigns included a spread of misinformation about the electoral process and messaging targeted at conservatives, encouraging them to support Trump in the election. For a couple of years, the Russian disinformation machine focused its attention on the war in Ukraine, using claims about secret germ warfare labs or Nazis embedded in Ukraine. The campaign attempted to reduce support for Ukraine in the U.S., but now in 2024, the efforts to interfere in U.S. elections do not appear to have stopped. They've just taken on a new form. AP News reported on March 1, 2024, that Russian state media and online accounts tied to the Kremlin had been spreading misinformation about immigration and immigrant crime with the intent of stoking fears surrounding the Mexican border. These posts have been described as misleading or even entirely fabricated. One campaign known as Doppelganger has continued to thrive on Facebook largely unchecked. Even after being exposed in 2022 and sanctioned by the EU, this campaign does not focus on U.S. citizens, but instead targets European voters, attracting the attention of French and German authorities. French Minister for European Affairs Jean-Noël Barrot spoke on the subject, saying, "In the past 6 weeks, there has not been 1 week without a coordinated disinformation campaign affecting France. The campaign has largely consisted of political ads being bought and pushed by doppelgangers on Facebook, using thousands of fake pages. Meta promised to review these pages, but the misinformation is popping up more quickly than it can be removed." Belgian Prime Minister Alexander De Croo weighed in on the problem as well. "According to our intelligence services, Moscow's objectives are clear: help elect more pro-Russian candidates to the European Parliament and reinforce the pro-Russian narrative in that institution. Only time will tell if these efforts are successful and if social media companies will be able to put a stop to the widespread campaigns." Now for something completely different and much less stressful. One of the funniest conspiracy theories is one that pretty much no one actually believes: birds aren't real. Popularized by a Vine video that later ballooned into a grassroots parody movement, Birds Aren't Real insists that all birds in the United States were killed by the Reagan administration and replaced with spies that now monitor our every move. Don't freak out, we're not about to tell you that the pigeon outside your window is actually a spy drone. But the US government using animals as spies is not so far-fetched. In the 1960s, the CIA was determined to find a new, innovative way to spy on Soviet embassies. So did they use birds? Of course not. Don't be ridiculous. They used cats. Operation Acoustic Kitty was a plan concocted by the CIA to turn cats into spying devices. This would be accomplished by implanting a microphone in the cat's ear and a transmitter at the base of its skull. Once the cat was sufficiently bugged, and probably pretty annoyed too, it would be trained to sit near foreign officials and record their conversations. You know how cats are universally well known for being easy to train, right? Oh, what's that? It's the opposite? Well, that would explain why the first and only official test went so poorly. The CIA prepared an acoustic kitty, drove it to the park, leaving it to record the conversation between 2 men sitting on a bench. Rather than sitting still, the cat wandered out into the street, where it was unfortunately hit by a taxi. The Acoustic Kitty project was swiftly abandoned, but the CIA did not give up hope when it came to turning animals into spies. We lied to you before. Conspiracies are everywhere, even here at the Infographic Show. There were, in fact, bird spies during the Cold War. Pigeons, to be exact. The CIA's Office of Research and Development came up with a camera small and light enough for a pigeon to carry it. The camera was attached to a pigeon with a harness and deployed over an area the CIA wanted to collect more information on. When the pigeon returned, the pictures would be ready to review. The CIA also trained a raven to drop bugging devices on windowsills around that same time, but no usable audio was picked up from the devices the agency managed to place. The CIA didn't just use real animals as spies, they also created fake animals too. While looking for a way to collect water samples without being detected in certain areas, the Office of Advanced Technologies and Programs developed a pair of unmanned underwater vehicles shaped like catfish, dubbed Charlie and Charlene. These remote-controlled fish would collect water samples that the CIA could inspect for nuclear runoff or other suspicious substances. Birds may be real, but what if we told you bugs aren't real? We'd be lying, mostly, but still. It's more like one bug in particular isn't real. In the 1970s, the CIA Office of Research and Development created the Insectothopter, an unmanned aerial vehicle disguised as a dragonfly. Originally, the plan was to disguise the UAV as a bumblebee, but the department worried it would be unable to replicate the unpredictable flight patterns of bees. Additionally, anyone who spotted the fake bee might have been tempted to swat it out of fear of being stung. So a dragonfly it was. The Insectothopter was a listening device, or a bug, with a small engine making its wings flap up and down. It was fast enough to pass as the real thing, able to fly 200 meters in 60 seconds. But there was one unexpected obstacle to the little spy bug: the wind. In crosswinds over 5 miles per hour, the Insectothopter would be blown away. There's not much use for a spy who can be defeated by a light breeze. In 1947, something strange fell from the sky over Roswell, New Mexico. This unidentified flying object attracted national attention, especially from those who believed in extraterrestrial life. The U.S. Air Force announced that the object was not a flying saucer, but a weather balloon. Still, theories swirled that the whole thing was a government cover-up intended to keep people from learning the truth, that aliens had crash-landed on the Earth. Well, they were right. Not about the aliens part, probably, but those who doubted the official story from the Air Force were onto something. What fell from the sky over Roswell was not a weather balloon or a flying saucer, but the property of Project Mogul. Roger Launius, former curator of space history at the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum, spoke with Smithsonian Magazine about the whole saga, stating, Apparently, it was better from the Air Force's perspective that there was a crashed alien spacecraft out there than to tell the truth. So what exactly was Project Mogul, and why be so secretive about it? Project Mogul was a classified government program in which high-altitude balloons were launched into the ionosphere, intended to monitor Russian nuclear testing. The Project Mogul balloons were sent up to an altitude of 10 to 20 kilometers, where they would ride the upper jet stream toward Russia. But obviously, Launius said something happened to this one balloon. It came back to Earth and probably was spread across a wide area. The true story of Roswell came out in the 90s, when a New Mexico representative asked the General Accounting Office to apply pressure to the Pentagon regarding the declassification of Roswell-related documents. An Air Force report was released in 1994, concluding that Roswell was most likely from one of the Mogul balloons that had not been previously recovered. This seems to line up with reports that one of the balloons launched in New Mexico in June of 1947 was never recovered after its mission. Of course, by the time the Air Force admitted the true story, it was too late to put the proverbial alien genie back in the bottle. America had a raging case of UFO fever, and the only cure was more UFOs, more theorizing, more speculating, and searching for proof of life beyond our galaxy. Many still believe that the cover-up never ended, and that the Project Mogul explanation is just another layer of government lies. Have you ever heard the expression, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you? While that's not productive advice for most people, especially private citizens, it seems that it might have applied to one of America's most famous writers. A.E. Hotchner, author of the books Papa Hemingway and Hemingway and His World, wrote in the New York Times that he believed Hemingway's tragic death may have been linked to his long-held belief that the FBI was spying on him. Hotchner described an encounter with Hemingway in November 1960, where Hemingway said, "It's the worst hell, the goddamnedest hell. They've bugged everything. That's why we're using Duke's car. Mine's bugged. Everything's bugged. Can't use the phone, mail intercepted." At the time, this was regarded as a paranoid delusion, but history has revealed that Hemingway was right about the FBI's interest in spying on him. In the 1980s, Hemingway's FBI file was declassified after a Freedom of Information request by Jeffrey Myers at the University of Colorado. The file cataloged Hemingway's ties to anti-fascist work and included a report from the special agent who had been ordered to follow Hemingway and spy on him in person. The file was over 120 pages long, suggesting that Hoover and the Bureau were much more interested in monitoring Hemingway than anyone realized while the writer was still alive. We started this video with corporate greed, and we're ending it with, you guessed it, even more corporate greed. Lead gasoline used to be completely normalized, standard to find at any gas station. Of course, lead is highly dangerous and has been linked to an incredible number of health problems. So, how could the gas companies not know the potential consequences? You know this next part by now. They did. In 1921, a General Motors engineer named Thomas Midgley Jr. realized a new additive that could be used to eliminate the knocking, or the uneven burn of fuel, in car engines: tetraethyl lead, also known as TEL. Sure, they could have used ethanol for the same purpose, but that couldn't have been patented or controlled by GM, so why do that? So TEL was selected, in spite of the fact that in 1922 a DuPont executive described it as very poisonous if absorbed through the skin, resulting in lead poisoning almost immediately. But it went to market anyway, and in February of 1923 the first tank of leaded gasoline was sold. Meanwhile, Midgley was at home in bed, sick, with severe lead poisoning. Imagine that. The following year, 5 workers died from TEL exposure at the Standard Oil refinery in New Jersey, but the leaded gasoline continued to be sold. There was even a Public Health Service report in 1926 that claimed there was no reason to prohibit the sale of leaded gasoline as long as there was a way to protect the workers while they made it. Leaded gasoline was finally banned in 1996, but by then the damage was already done to entire generations of children exposed to the poison. Lead exposure in children has been linked to neurological injuries, hyperactivity, behavioral problems, learning disabilities, and even an increase in violent crime. Even without leaded gasoline being sold anymore, the lead lingers in the environment, left behind by gasoline fumes from decades past. But hey, at least the engines weren't knocking anymore. That's worth it, right? Now check out insane conspiracy theories that turned out to be true, or watch this video instead.